I would like to talk about one other thing, if you don't mind, and that is something that I sent to you.
Okay.
So as I was, going through my preparation for this show, over the last few days, I've been listening to a podcast I really like, which is it's actually the Homecoming podcast, which, anyone who's listened to that is a scripted fictional podcast. I think it's on season 2 right now. They are transitioning that into a TV show that just premiered a couple of days ago on Amazon Prime, and for the first season. And what they did on the Homecoming podcast feed is they put in 4 episodes of the show Startup, which is about, basically startups of businesses or whatever, or things like that. And it was actually the people who developed the Homecoming podcast, how they transitioned that into the actual TV show as well. So they kind of commingled the two. And the 4th episode, which is the final one in the series, has a really interesting thing that I heard, and it's a little section that I sent over to René. He's going to play here for you in a second, featuring I think he's the writer director of Mr. Robot and now of Homecoming, Sam Esmail. And maybe if you roll that, then I'll comment about why that affected me.
All right, let me just run it now.
Art and commerce together. How do you make it work?
To me, the minute you start worrying how many people will this resonate with, or how many people will this, attract, or what is a demographic of whatever it is you're doing, I think once you go down that road, it's a fail. I think creatively, when you start to compromise authenticity for what you think people will like, or what you think people will want, or when you start editing yourself because that's too scary and you think that will scare people off, I think the work suffers, the art suffers. And my core belief is what people want is maybe something they don't realize, and that you just have to run with that and say, if you make good art, even if it's scary to people, even if it's challenging for people, they will come, because it's in its core a genuine experience from the creator. So that was a really interesting piece for me, and the reason that resonated with me was because I'm going back like two episodes now. This whole thing with the meteorite, and my reaction to it, and living with that kind of discussion. And that's a very particular response, but I guess I wanted to talk about it a little more broadly, which is, was I kind of squandering, or squelching you kind of and your vision, and this whole idea of compromise and art versus commerce, and who am I as a target audience member reading this and reacting in a certain way. And, I had a pretty strong reaction to that scene originally. And, is it okay for me to kind of try and push my opinion on you as someone who's your collaborator, and say, I don't really think you're going to lose, some of your audience here. And I think that you are going to lose me here, as a potential viewer. Where's that line, and this is just something I've been struggling with, because I'm really trying to look at it more as a broad discussion. Because I know at the end of the day, you still kept it in, you certainly, downplayed some of those science fiction elements, but as I guess, what am I now, a second time collaborator with you on projects, I feel a certain responsibility that I know I'm someone that you respect in terms of my voice, but I am one person, and ultimately there's your vision, maybe there's my feedback on it, and then there's other people, audience members, you know what I mean? And I just want to make sure that both what we did, or what you did, and going forward, that there's always that huge divide between the major decision maker here and your vision in this particular project,
and the pieces that I bring in terms of criticism too. So I don't know if you actually listened to that little snippet or not, but again, it really affected me when I heard it, and I thought I'd share that with you and the rest of the listeners. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the snippet is more about, in the way I'm interpreting it anyway, is that it's about commercial success versus what you as a writer want to write. Yeah. And, I think in an ideal world, we would have the ability to, well, let me just rephrase this or recast this. If I were a trillionaire, so I have essentially unlimited income,
yeah,
I would just make the movies I want to make, irrespective of what anyone else thought. Just, there you go. It's my money. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So unless you're in that situation, you have to work with other people's money. Right? So I think that commerce will always play a factor into the final product that you create.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if that means it's a fail as a piece of art, then, if we're going to go, if that's going to be the rubric, then I guess it's a fail. I'm not such a hardliner that I think that. I think that just like we are writing within a format, we are writing within certain constraints. You can still have art within that constraint. In fact, I want to sound eloquent with what I want to say here, but I guess what I want to get out is that without the constraint shaping the form of the artwork, then the art is, this is going to sound extreme, but I can't think of any better word. It's meaningless.
It's art in a vacuum.
Well, it's art, not in a vacuum necessarily, but art in a vast emptiness, an unending emptiness where the art no longer has form. So you think of water, water in a glass, water is shaped by the glass. But if the water were to just be spilled out on a table, it's just, well, not even that. If water were to be thrown into space, then the water would just separate and just be this indescribable mass that was always changing, and no one would ever be able to describe it. Whereas in a glass, you can say, okay, it's in a cylindrical shape, or you pour it in some kind of weird looking bottle. You can say it's taken the form of that bottle, and then you can describe the water that way. So I think that's the first part I wanted to discuss. But I think you also moved on to, taking people's opinions and being the final decision maker, and how does it affect me. I hope I'm representing what you said correctly.
Yeah.
But, I think we discussed this in the last episode, or at least in one of the outtake about taking criticism. And I've been thinking about this myself, I wouldn't say a great deal, but off and on since then. Mm-hmm. And I think as a writer, before you open up the project to feedback, to criticism, you should have a very strong sense of the story you're trying to tell. And what feedback can do is it can challenge your, how strong you are in your faith, how strong your faith is in your script, in the story you're trying to tell. And if people are persuasive enough to tell you, like, hey, this thing, you internally will think, okay, I'm really strong on this character being this way. But if someone is able to come up with a persuasive argument as to why he or she should be tweaked in a different way, then that's great. That's awesome. You are persuaded. So, you should consider what this person has to say. But just because they say something and they're emphatic about, oh, no, this guy shouldn't be Chinese, he should be an American Indian or something like that. If you're not convinced, well, okay, that only reinforces your faith in what you've written as being the story you want to tell.
Right.
Now there are times when, I'm writing the connective tissue that, I've got these strong iconic scenes. I'm like, yeah, this is blazing red hot in my retina. I know exactly what that looks like. How do I get these two connected? And then I write this connective tissue that, it's like, I don't know if this is good. And typically I would work on it. What's that?
Let's throw it out there.
Yeah, exactly. But, typically I would work on it privately and say, okay, well, let's make it stronger. Let me get to a place where I can defend it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But that's not the nature of this project. So I kind of have to throw stuff out there.
I got you.
And, if I feel like the connective tissue, the faith that I have in it has been overcome by a persuasive argument, then okay, I'll consider changing it. Now that's not always 100% that I will change it. There are a lot of other factors here. Like, for instance, one of the things I said to you when we were having the meteorite discussion is that, well, look, this is where our experience in movies diverge, right? Like the other night I sent you that Chinese zombie movie, very obscure Chinese zombie movie that I'd watched, on a whim a long time ago during the, the bootleg downloading era, when everyone starting to get high-speed internet. You're like, I will download the world illegally. Yeah, I was one of those guys. I looked up everything that was zombie because I loved zombie stuff, and I found this Chinese. What's that, Brian?
Allegedly.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Allegedly. And I saw this Chinese zombie thing. I'm like, I'll watch this, and luckily it had subtitles, and I loved this movie.
Yeah.
And
cool tone.
There are parts. There is at least one part in it that has made it into this film as a little homage.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so the point I'm making is that, if I'm writing in a genre that perhaps someone who's giving feedback is not very familiar with, they may find certain things odd, and they may find it to be, taking them out of the script. All of the feelings that you experienced.
Right.
And I have to know my readers well enough to add that kind of value to what you're saying. Now, if you're just somebody who I don't know and I don't necessarily respect too much, right? Or maybe you're just somebody who watches a lot of Hollywood movies, then I will degrade the value of your opinions and say, okay, your opinion, as emphatic as you are, is worth this much to me. Is that enough to overcome my faith in having this scene the way it is? So look, it's not an exact science.
Yeah.
It's all kind of very fluid in my mind, and I try not to take. I try to make the formula a little easier by removing my emotion from it and just say what is in the best service of the story that I want to tell. I know that was a little long-winded, but it had to be said.
No less long-winded than I was before you, believe me.